So I have to admit that I have watched an awful lot of superhero movies and television shows. And I've always been fascinated by them, and I suppose I will admit that the darker the Batman character, the more I like him. Probably says way more about me than you want to know. But if you think about it for a moment, there are so many superhero movies coming on. In fact, I was looking to see just how many, and I lost count, but there's actually a website you can go to and find out between now and 2020 how many superhero movies there will be. The page took so long to load, I just stopped looking. There is this growing fascination, and I read a paper recently this last week by a psychology student. Since it's not published, I'm not going to mention it yet. It just happened to be online, and I was reading it. It basically said, in times of great stress and turmoil throughout America's history, that we have always turned to superheroes for our cultural imagination. If you look at when Superman came on the scene, various characters at the time of World War II, Captain America came on the scene. Superman during the Great Depression, and at other times. We are in times of economic and societal stress, and there are more superheroes than we can count. It is this sort of deep need within us, hopefully, that someone's just going to come along and fix all our problems. And it sells really well. I think it taps into the secret desire that on some level we'd all like to have a superpower, wouldn't you? The question is, what would that superpower be? I'm not going to ask. I'm not sure I want to know. But then there's this other thing that we desire, is that in the world that is so complex, we really just want simplicity. Some one person to come along, wave their magic wand, and fix it all. We are always waiting for that next superhero. We used to do that with presidential candidates. If we could just find the next candidate, they're the person who I can finally believe in and follow, and now, well, it just looks like a third-rate circus. Which gets at another issue, I think. If we wait too long, some of us go, I'm not ever going to another superhero movie, that's just stupid. I know you wouldn't say that out loud, but inside I can see it twisting its effect. What I think that's coming from is a whole side of been there, done that, seen it, and no, it's not going to happen. We're not waiting for the next superhero anymore because we know that simple solutions never lead to good results. But the problem with that kind of thinking is reality is that it can lead us to become a little bit cynical about everything and everyone who comes along. And so we end up kind of sitting on the sidelines pointing out what everyone else is doing wrong. Because we know that nothing's going to change. And at the heart of our cynicism probably is some level of idealism that was never fully realized. Now, it's really clear to me that Jesus was surrounded by both types of folks. Jesus had those folks who believed that he was the Messiah, the superhero who was going to come along and make everything okay. And they were hungry. But then he was also surrounded by some folks who were cynical. And I think that cynicism in our faith shows up in some interesting ways. Well, nothing's going to change, so we just have to wait till Jesus comes. It's resignation that says, well, there's nothing that can be done. Jesus will take care of it. I'm just going to sit back and complain. Jesus' question actually gets at the heart of where we want, what we want from Jesus. Who do the people say I am? And then the hard question. Who do you say that I am? Well, Peter, in his confession, says that he is the Messiah, the superhero, the one who's come to take along. And so when Jesus comes along and says, the Son of Man must suffer, Peter's like, no, you're going to make everything all right. You don't know what you're talking about. When Jesus is rebuked by Peter, that word rebuke only shows up in the gospel when Jesus uses it to deal with demons and Satan in the early temptations. Peter says, Jesus, you gotta stay quiet. Because they are stuck thinking that Jesus is going to fix everything. They're following him. And at this point, because Jesus as the Messiah will fix everything, he is their embodiment of the the superhero, he's going to get rid of Rome and the corrupt local politicians and the religious leadership. And when they say that you are the Messiah, Jesus understands that they have missed very clearly what he's all about. He understands that they're willing to stand back and let him take care of everything and have places of honor along the way. Now, as a good student of the prosperity gospel, Peter understands clearly when you pray, when you are faithful in a certain particular kind of Republican Christian way, I'll give you, that God will come along and take care of all your problems. So when Jesus comes along and says that faith is about suffering, Peter has to correct Jesus. He has to tell Jesus, you've got this all wrong. And it reminds me of the time that I watched on television when I lived in Atlanta, the good Reverend Creflo Dollar. And he stood up in front of his congregation and said something that was unbelievably prophetic. He was right. He said, Jesus wasn't poor. If Jesus was poor, we'd all be hypocrites. And I said, amen, you're right, we are. Because in fact he was. Sometimes we're not so comfortable with the Jesus of the suffering. We want the Jesus who's going to fix all of our stuff. Now, that's not really so much our problem. We start getting into trouble when Jesus comes along and says, you're supposed to love your enemies. And we go, no, what he really meant was is that we're supposed to use our most recent military technology on them. Or when Jesus says, you're supposed to feed people. Share what you have. If you have 2 coats, give them away. What we heard was, well, no. You're supposed to divide them unto the deserving and the undeserving hungry people. We've been rebuking Jesus for generation upon generation upon generation. And so Jesus rebukes all this way of thinking. Rebuke, it's what Jesus does when he's dealing with demons. And what this passage really tells us is that those who are even the closest to Jesus, being Peter, sometimes the closest followers of Jesus can act like a demon. And that ought to keep us humble. To make sure that the followers of Jesus understand that he is not a superhero who is there to solve all of their problems, he says this: you have to pick up your cross and follow in this way. He does not say, believe in my precepts, follow my orthodoxy, make sure you go to church every week. Yes, I just said that right. What he says is, pick up your cross and follow in this new way of living in the world. And that is what will probably cost you. Now, when I was a child, I grew up hearing, this is my cross to bear. Anybody else heard that? I won't put you on the spot and say if you've said it, because I have as well, but at some point. It might have been a medical issue that they were talking about. It might have been a financial issue. It might have been trouble with a spouse. It might have been something along those personal lines, but it was always something personal about their own life. This is my cross to bear. So whenever trouble and suffering would come in any form, people would often say to others, well, this is just your cross to bear. You ever heard anybody say that? Yeah, I've heard that too. But the problem is this kind of thinking isn't just wrong. Make it clear, it's just wrong. There's no biblical foundation whatsoever, and I'll get there in a minute. But it's also dangerous. And that's the piece that's more important to remember. The term pick up your cross has been used to justify continued violence against people. It was used to keep people in oppressive situations. God destined you to be a slave, so you should be thankful. It's your cross to bear, and people and preachers said that. God destined you to maybe convert your spouse who's beating you. It's your cross to bear. Pastors have said that. When a parent abuses you, it's just your cross to bear. And that is where it starts to get dangerous. Because we have taken the cross out of its original context, and we can use it for whatever we want. This is not what the cross is all about. Being a Christian is not about being a doormat. The cross was never meant to be a symbol of just generalized suffering. Whenever I'm having a bad day, well, this is my cross day. No, the cross was a symbol of oppression. The cross was a tool of state-sanctioned torture. The cross was a way to keep populations compliant in their suffering. So there is no way that Jesus meant his followers should become sadists in whatever trouble might come their way. Think about it for a moment. When the Messiah, the Savior of the world, chose the way of the cross and said, "Come and follow me," he was making it abundantly clear that he was not going to be that superhero. Now, there's no doubt, picking up the cross does involve suffering. But it's the kind of suffering that comes when you challenge an oppressive order. When Jesus said, "Pick up the cross," his followers knew they had seen people hanging on the cross. And most of the people who hang on the cross were there because they were seen as traitors to the empire. Not because they were robbers or bandits. They were revolutionaries who were trying to change the power of Rome. The kind of suffering that comes from picking up the cross is the kind when Jesus says no to the religious community that was getting rich off the poor people in Jerusalem and in Nazareth. Jesus in the cross is saying no to the empires of the world that use force and coercion to enrich the 1%. But it's a whole lot easier to take it all out of historical context because, frankly, wouldn't just having a pain in your leg be a lot better to deal with as your cross than thinking, what do you mean I've got to take up my cross against the empire? But Jesus says you do it in love, which is the odd thing in all of this, right? He says, pick up the cross because you love and identify with those who are suffering. It's like putting down your privilege and standing with those who are suffering, knowing full well that you might just face trouble too. What is our cross to bear? I think it changes with the times. Go to the places where people are suffering and facing violence in their communities, in their homes. When Jesus says pick up the cross, and he's talking about if you face an abusive situation and someone knows about it, it means that the person outside is supposed to pick up that cross and report it. And then face the trouble once you've reported it. Jesus doesn't say to the suffering people, oh, that's your cross. What he says is to the people who aren't suffering, pick up your cross and join with those who are suffering so that we can change those situations. Knowing full well that Jesus ended up on the cross and dead. Jesus is asking us to join in the movement, wherever we are, wherever we can, about humanizing, dehumanizing the situations. Join the movements. Seek to end injustice, to end hunger, to end inequality. Challenge the oppressive systems around us. And that's the hard part. We have to figure out what that looks like for each one of us, because each one of us lives in a different part of it. So how do we do that? In whatever way we best can. Each one of us can, from the youngest to the oldest. Our faith is really not about waiting for superheroes, even though it's couched that way an awful lot of times. Our faith invites us to get off the sidelines, to give up our cynicism, to know full well that we can spend our entire lives working for one particular issue of justice and feel like we're going backwards. And we join anyway because the truth of the matter is if we don't, we will be changed. I've grown really fond of this quote from the Talmud. Some of you might have heard it before. It says this: "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justice now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." When Jesus says, "Take up the cross," it might not be putting ourselves at the front line of a movement that might get us killed. It might just be figuring out a way to undermine in some small way. It's like the story of Oscar Schindler and his bookkeeper, who figured out a way to mess with the books to save more lives, doing the best they could, secretly, while at the same time shaking the very people's hands that were trying to kill the people they were trying to save. And they did what they could where they were. So I believe that each one of us in this room has the ability to bring the gospel, to bring life wherever you live every day. Our prayer really ought to be, "Lord, just help me be part of this movement." Opportunities will present themselves. Lord, help us be part of this movement every day. Amen.